everyone. So we're here today. Thank you, Leah, for planning this amazing event, and Vicky for your support. This event is the Writing and Publishing Cases Workshop. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll turn it over to this vibrant discussion with these amazing panel. So good morning. As you guys know, I'm Rachael Pettigrew, and it's great to see everyone. I'm pleased to offer the land acknowledgement. As we know, land acknowledgements are an important part of reconciliation, demonstrating our respect for both the Indigenous community as hosts and the land for all it does. I myself am a 10th generation settler, dating back to the mid-1600s in the traditional territories of the Mohican people in what is now called Connecticut. Then settling for 13 years in Winnipeg and the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation before moving to this land where we are here today. I acknowledge my inherited responsibility resulting from the impacts of colonization and acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices facing Indigenous peoples. Given it is easier to ignore ongoing injustices when we see the impacts of colonization as a historical issue, land acknowledgements should also celebrate Indigenous peoples past, present, and future as they live, work, and thrive on this land. So I am committed to, in collaboration with Indigenous peoples, to continue to learn, listen, and do my part in opposing injustice in all its forms. So with that said, Mount Royal University is located on the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Very excited to have you all here. I want to give credit to Rachel. This was her brilliant idea. She said we need to do something on writing and publishing cases. So this was
you did the heavy lifting.
No, this was a joint effort, and we're really excited to be able to do this together. I want to really quickly introduce our panelists. So we're excited to have 4 panelists today. We have Dr. Connie Vanderbilt. She was a strategy professor here. We miss her very much. And now Associate Vice President of Research, Scholarship, and Community Engagement. We have Dr. Allan Dwyer, Associate Professor of Finance. We have Dr. Denise Chenger, Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management. And we have Dr. Rose Asgharzadeh, Assistant Professor of Human Resources. Really excited to have this interdisciplinary group here who has extensive experience in publishing cases. So yeah, let's get started. The first question that we have for everyone is, can you start by telling people about your case writing and publishing experience? Like, what have you published? Where have you published it? Connie, let's start with you.
Okay, and I'm going to take an AVPR plug to start and just say that I think cases are great for faculty at Mount Royal. I think it hits some of our strategic priorities around advancing knowledge, sort of the academic, the teaching note piece, bringing it into the classroom, so informing teaching, and then the community engagement piece as well. So I think they're great. I have published 3 cases with Ivy. 2013 was a case on Suncor Energy. 2018, a case on a small entrepreneurial fly fishing organization out of Fernie, BC. And then 2023 on Paul Hardy, who is a fashion designer here in Calgary. I'm wearing one of his shirts. And kind of how he pivoted through pandemic was the basis of that case. And then 2 unpublished, I wrote a really lengthy, really bad case as a PhD student at UC that was used in classroom but never published. And then I wrote another case for a case competition that I should have published. We'll talk about that later, and I didn't. So that's my case writing experience.
Thanks, Connie.
I, for many years, ever since I started teaching, have been writing short cases, 1-page cases for class work. So there's really three elements of what I want to say. First of all is I write these smaller cases for class, little vignettes to teach a specific point. I find students like that. They're fairly easy to throw together quickly, just be creative. I write up whatever kind of an idea. A lot of them, some of them are based on my own foibles in my finance career. So having to do with ethics, certain types of securities, etc. The second type of case I write and use is in exams. I like these comprehensive, so this is only, I'm talking about a specific course that I teach, which is Finance 5010. I write comprehensive cases that involve several different elements of the whole semester within one case. And sometimes I either give it to the students 24 hours before the final exam, or I give it to them in the exam, and it's sort of serialized throughout the exam. And then I have finally a case at Ivy going through the first stages of it's been accepted and it's going through the academic review part right now. There were some delays earlier this year in that whole getting data and getting some permissions, but it's now at Ivy, and it's a case on, we have in the finance department as a priority indigenization, trying to find some way of having indigenous content. So the case is it's a combination of indigenization and finance. I won't get into the details of it unless later on that is required, but it's an attempt on my part to inject some form of easily accessible for the professors, indigenous content, indigenous thinking, and lead the students through a process of thinking about indigenization and how it could be connected to finance and financial markets.
My experience has been, I've had 2 cases written and published with Ivy, and we're working on a third, and I've worked with the same partner for both cases, which is kind of helpful, so we've got a little bit of a rhythm going.
My background includes conducting and managing some cases and projects in human resources and educational development. So in various research institutes, and also some ministry, education ministry and petroleum ministry, based on the cases that they wanted to actually work on. One of them was the meaning of the work in a place that was very important among the people that were working there. Another one was on internationalization, on an institute, educational institute, and
And sorry, Rose, where did you say they're published?
yeah, in Iran, actually in my country. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So what drew you for each of your cases? What drew you to the company or the topic? I know you had an interesting one you mentioned about a fly fishing organization. And how did you get connected? So maybe where did the spark of interest come, and how did you action that? Anyone want to field that? Because you have, Denise, you have one with a brewery as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say both cases were people that we knew from industry. Both of my partner and myself work on qualitative research, so we're in the industry quite a bit. So companies that way. These 2 happen to be more on like people that we know in the relation in our own relationships. What drew me to it was, I think, something that's unique. Like I went to Ivy and I use Ivy cases and Harvard cases in the classroom. So really familiar with them, and I know what I'm always searching for, so like to use in the classroom. So for me, it was, what do I want to write about then that would probably help and supplement folks like me in the classroom. So the one that we did on the brewery was interesting to me because this person had been in business for 20 years and had just put $1 million into their business of their own money, and COVID shut them down and they had no way to pay this off. So it was an interesting one from a financial operations, the whole COVID part. So it was multifaceted that way. The second one was another folks that we knew. They were in a services business. Services are obviously hard to predict income, and trying to get into the products business. So what does that look like from a switch? So it appealed more to like the operations and marketing. So again, kind of multifaceted. And then we're working on a separate one with them, with that same company. But I would say the biggest part is just having industry people that you know and that they were willing to help out. And they also had some really interesting scenarios that I think make for a very interesting learning experience for students.
I think, so mine are a bit varied. The Suncor Energy one was coming out of my dissertation, and one of the lead investigators on that project was from Ivy, and I think Ivy had a model of work on an academic paper, work on something sort of practitioner-based, and write a case. So that was part of the model that I actually really like. And the other was that research project was part of a creative sentencing here in Alberta. So the government was financing the research as part of a penalty for an environmental infraction. And so part of their requirement was the industry needs to learn from this. And so we thought writing a case could facilitate that, especially for the MBA classes that you see. The other two are a little bit more like what Denise is describing, kind of just people in your network, and there's some interesting question from my perspective from a strategic lens. And then also some stories that I think need to be out there. So many of you know, I like fashion, and so profiling Paul Hardy was also about getting his name out, the fact that we have fashion in Canada, and then what that looks like, and how you source that sustainably, and then how do you react when those exogenous factors affect you in a dramatic way, which is a very strategy question. And the Lost Creek, similarly, that's my neighbor in Fernie, and again, my cases tend to have a sustainability and a strategy lens. So, what's that connection to nature and biodiversity, and how does that play out in a case? And then also just seeing him struggle and wondering, is there a way for a class of students to help inform his decision making, to help him struggle less, which they did, but he didn't follow their advice. So there's that.
I'll go. I kind of the timeline of it is I got interested early in my time here in indigenization and what that might look like, and there was a sense of confusion as to whether or not indigenization is even a conversation you can have within the context of finance, and so it was sort of in the back of my mind. And then this Finance 5010, the Finance Capstone course, is a really great venue for trying things like this. So then I saw an actual case in the news of a First Nation in Saskatchewan, the Beardies and Okamassis First Nation, that had just won a large financial settlement for some wrongdoing the Canadian government had done between 1885 and 1888. Essentially, the Canadian government didn't fulfill part of a treaty promise. And then it went through a system of courts. There's a special courts, parallel court system in Canada called the Special Claims Tribunal. And it went through the Special Claims Tribunal, and the First Nation was awarded there was two different settlements, but for the initial part, they were awarded about $4 million. So immediately I'm thinking, where does that number come from? Where does the $4 million come from? The original loss to the two First Nations at the time, they've now been amalgamated, which is an administrative process from Ottawa, which has all kinds of incongruities and all kinds of oppression embedded in it. But anyway, it's now one First Nation. They were awarded this money, and the original loss to that First Nation had been only $4,000. So how do you get from $4,000 to $4 million? So that's what the case is about, having the students work through the process of what are the transcripts of the tribunal, and what are the financial operations that you performed, like what were the assumptions that were used by the court in awarding this award. So the principal in the case is actually an attorney in Calgary, Ron Maurice, who's Canada's only, his firm, Maurice Law, is Canada's largest Indigenous-owned and Indigenous-run law firm. And Ron Maurice is a senior, he's done courses, he's done cases in front of the Supreme Court. He's a very elite. He's a Cree and Métis attorney, very proud of that part of who he is. And so it took several years to become friends with him enough that he would take me into his confidence and walk me through the entire case. He's an immensely successful attorney, So that's what the case is. It's following him through the whole process and his mindset. And then so the case has 2 points to it. The students have to calculate in their own mind with some statistics and things they're given, what would their preferred settlement be? And then the second thing is we talk about genocide, the United Nations protocol on Indigenous populations, Rome statutes on international crime and crimes against humanity and all that, and tinker with that as well, and have the students. I mean, these are finance students, right? So have them enter this unknown zone of indigenous sort of trauma, and have them think a little bit about it and how it could be connected in some way to finance. So it's a very complicated, and that's why Ivy they love it, but there needs to be certain, obviously, sensitivities there that are addressed, right? So, sorry, that's a kind of a long story, but that's what the case is.
That's a great case, Allan.
Yeah,
We'll see how it goes.
interesting.
I'm hoping to make a ton of money out of it. All the proceeds from the sales of the case will be donated to the library at the First Station in Duck Lake, Saskatchewan.
Yeah, thank you. If I want to summarize it, I can tell that 3 things is important. The first one is your expertise. The second one is your interest, and the third one is affiliation. All of them, when they are together, so they help you that organization finds you, that place finds you, or you find them in case studies, and you can get, because if they wanna actually go through the process, they need to be sure that you are exceptional in it, you are professional in it. The money that they are expending on it is going to be actually have some results. So I think expertise, interest, and your affiliation helps for that.
Can I just add on to that? I've talked to many companies, and every company that I've talked to is willing to support this and do this. And it's a matter of kind of finding the time and their time, right? But the business community is always willing to help and support this. It's a matter of, I agree, right? Their time and then your time getting involved in that, for sure. But there's such a wide amount of companies that would be willing to do this, which is wonderful, to be able to give back to the academic community.
Leah, can I ask a follow-up question before we move to the next one? Just from I'm guessing that people that see this might be interested, or even people in the room. As far as naming the organization in the case, ethics, are there times when you don't necessarily have a relationship with the person you're writing about, but it's a public case, for example?
Yeah, you can do like a secondary data-based case. I think they're probably less preferred by some of the publishers. I know. So with Suncor, it went through their communications department, their legal department. A lot of eyes on, which had to be factored into the timeline. So I think it depends with the individuals, with the entrepreneurs. Ivy, at least, and I'm sure most of the publishers, there's a consent form that they sign, and that was pretty much it.
But I always start that up front with the conversation, that like, where is this going to be published, and their consent and signing off on this, to make sure that they're comfortable right up front than going too far down that path and having them back out is so important. Yeah, I think they think they're just trying to help me in the classroom, and it's like, oh no, this is going to be published like internationally, and they're, so to wrap their head around it. Yeah.
In my case, it's a little bit different. It's more sensitive, so it's and it's not an organization in the sense it's a law firm, and the law firm is journeying through this process, this essentially financial process. But there is a very profound kind of sensitive around the First Nation in Saskatchewan, kind of me as a settler telling their story for them, and kind of being one of their allies when they may not necessarily want an ally. So there was considerable discussion with Ron about all this, and he himself is a member of that community and related community, so he was able to negotiate that for me. But yes, there are the secondary ones. I think Connie's right. I've gotten really interested in cases, so I've looked into it a lot. It's far better to have the buy-in of the organization beforehand, rather than get all excited and start going down the road and then find out they're not interested, or that it's going to take some big administrative process and there's some lawyer somewhere who has to check on everything. It can become quite troubling and time-consuming. As we all know, we don't have much time here to do this stuff. So if one wants to make it easy for oneself, one has to be strategic about it from the get-go.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm hearing lots of themes around the relationship piece and making sure that you have trust, connection, and lots of conversations before you begin, making sure you have consent, they understand the publishing process, and that this will be essentially sent out to the world to read. And so I think those are really important things to keep in mind, and that this can be slowed down by, for example, sort of the bureaucracy around having to get sign off by legal and things like that. So thank you for sharing those tips. On this note about tips, I know you've covered a lot around the connection and the trust and the relationship piece, but what other tips do you have for people who decide this is something I'd like to do? If you can provide a few tips, that would be great, especially as people are just getting started, if they've never done this before. We'll start with you, Rose.
If they haven't started yet, I believe that I can say by a kind of acronym GPS. What do I mean by GPS? G, I mean goal setting, and P, I mean prioritizing consistency over perfection, because sometimes it is whatever they are doing, and S, I mean seeking feedback often and early, because sometimes they are doing something, finishing, and at the end they want to get feedback, so it is not good. And by goal setting, I mean that because they need to start it, so it's better to start it to break their goals in some manageable tasks and start step by step. And by, as I told you, it is the G, goal setting, and P, I think that it is very important to prioritize consistency over perfection. Perfection is not important. When they are starting, everyone wants to be the perfect one, best one, but normally it is not possible, or it takes time. The consistency is very important. They need to go on. And by, as I told you, S, it means that they need to seek feedback and often early come and ask about what, if someone else has done it before, just go be in contact with them to get feedback, and I think that is the best of it.
Okay, thanks, Rose.
Couple of things. So to me, when I read the cases, there's two types of cases. There's ones that are very directed, like if I think of my industry or my discipline in supply chain, you could do something on a warehouse or on inventory, and those are very directed. Or something broader of some of the ones we've talked about here today, where you're kind of hitting on, sales and marketing or strategy and sustainability, that I think appeal in a different way. So to think about that up front, is there something very targeted you're after, or is this kind of a general learning case? The amount of research that goes into it is not insignificant. There's a fair bit of work. The one that we did with the company they're an advertising company, and they were trying to diversify into products. And one of the products, they had some really interesting ideas, and the one that we went with was they were developing shrub as a drink, which is vinegar based, which I had no idea. That's one of the oldest forms of alcohol in the world, and launching this. But the amount of research that we did, we worked closely with Jeff, our librarian, to pull a lot of different papers on marketing companies and what's their average margin, and the beer industry and the liquor industry, and some of it was only US based, and population and who's drinking it. Like, there's a lot of research that goes into this. So there's the meetings and interviews with the company, but then there's also a lot of work behind the scenes to build a really interesting case where students have something to play with, right? The numbers, the details, the red herrings, all of those kinds of things of what is and isn't important. So it's not an insignificant endeavor for sure. The other piece that I think helped with the company was, as a way to give back to them too, is to provide some of that research and information to them on because as a small business owner, you're not aware of some of those types of statistics. So I think that was helpful for the business owner. And then just in general terms of the cases, and this comes more from Ivy, is they're most interested in that 5 to 8 pages. I remember when I went to Ivy, we had 10, 20 page cases, 50 page cases, but students' attention span apparently is a little bit less, that they're looking for something detailed enough, but that we can digest in 5, 6 pages. Strong teaching notes is probably one of the things that I look for, is I may not be a specialist on that case, on that topic, but I really look for really good notes so that I can make the class discussion a little bit more interesting and resourceful. And then I would say that you're very clear in your writing, that opening paragraph, the closing paragraph, very clear on what you're trying to do. And then clear in the teaching notes on what this is and who this is for. Like, this is an undergraduate case, could be used for graduate, it's operation based or whatever, so that you're clear when, as somebody trying to skim through them, to find cases that I don't have to read 12, 14 pages of teaching notes. I can get enough to see if I want to read further. So I think if you're very clear on those types of things, I think it helps with the acceptance on that. Pass it over.
Thank you. Excuse me, Connie.
No, go ahead.
Very key last point there from Denise on who the target is. The cases I write for students at Mount Royal are for students at Mount Royal. They're undergraduate students here. The Ivy is the only one I have any experience with. It's been a long kind of back and forth with them. The key is they really want to know who is this for. Is this for undergraduate students or is this for MBA students? And I've decided, or we have decided, or they decided that it would be better at an MBA level. So that's a whole different thing that I'm not. I have an MBA and I worked with cases, but writing an MBA level case is a different type of thing. Remember, I would also say a tip is to remember this is a teaching vehicle. It's like, I'm really interested in the whole topic and the human rights of it all and the history of it all, but who cares? History, right? They want a case that's going to teach some kids how to do time value of money calculations over an extended period of time and different forms of discounting and data gathering, and then reflecting a little bit on reconciliation and how that could proceed in Canada as finance professionals. Those are the two things for Ivy wants. So although I may have my own interests in the history of it and the whole thing, that really it's a teaching vehicle. And keep that in mind right up front, I would say. That how are young people or how are MBA students going to learn from this thing? And the length is huge. They don't want anything longer than 8 pages. And then, I don't know if either of you have bumped into this, but Ivy's now asking for multimedia or any kind of online content.
Yeah.
If you can have a YouTube channel with they'll facilitate it a bit, but they will see if there's some interview with some principal people, or if there's some kind of little film that you've made, or some kind of anything like that students can go and click and get some video sort of information as well. They love that, and that increases your chances of getting it accepted at Ivy.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I'll just build on a few things that have been said. One is with respect to the research Denise was describing. That's a nice opportunity for a student RA to help you out as well. They won't be co-authors if it's Ivy at least, but they can be acknowledged, and it's a great experience for them. And then teaching note. I think, I first case 2013, last case I did 2023. The expectation of Ivy around the connection to theory and the teaching note has increased dramatically. That was where a lot of the back and forth for me was, Allan. I don't know if that's your experience. And rightly so, because like Denise said, we all teach cases. It's super helpful to have a really good teaching note to work with. The other is, and this is connected to what I was saying about the case I wrote and didn't publish, like create a deadline timeline for yourself, because I find in our world here at Mount Royal the case can sit and you kind of pick it up, which is kind of the beauty of a case, because it's mostly on your timeline until you get to the final editing and reviews with Ivy. But it's kind of a shame. I think it's a shame I didn't publish that case. So I think you have to be a little disciplined, self-disciplined in making sure you're moving it forward and getting to that point of publication. I think that was it that I wanted to know about.
Can I add a little bit there? A little bit of color? I don't know, somewhere in the Ivy materials they sent me, they estimate, they sort of say, hey, this shouldn't take any longer than 6 weeks for you to do as a professional. Like, this shouldn't take any longer than 6 weeks for you to pull it. So, I'm not sure how that would work. For me, it's been a couple of years, but again, you're right. I think it's easy to put. It's the last thing on your list, right? It's like, oh my God, midterm. So the case is sort of sitting there for a few weeks, and then there's other things get piled on top of it. So I love the idea of timelines and being strict with yourself. And Rose's ideas as well about, who's this for, who are the principals, what are the whole GPS thing you mentioned, I think is very interesting.
And I think Allan and Denise both alluded to this, but if you know where you think you want to publish, like see what their criteria is right up front
Yeah.
and start working towards that.
Yeah, what you're gonna need up front. Yeah, good one.
These are all really great tips on the idea of the timeline and thinking about who's the audience, right? And knowing that up front. And I think I really like what you said about this is a vehicle for teaching. So therefore, the teaching note's important and this multimedia component. When we think about how to create an engaging classroom, this makes sense, right? And thinking about this at the outset. I wonder too if it makes sense for people who have not yet written a case, perhaps start by teaching with cases, right? And I feel that is a way to actually understand how this is going to be used in the end, and therefore can help you craft it at the outset. And I really like what all of you said about the idea of giving back to the company, whether that's, as you said, Denise, statistics from the industry, getting the word out about a fashion company or so on, but to think of this as we do with all types of research now, not as an extractive activity, but rather what is the reciprocity in this relationship and what am I giving back? Okay, turning it over to Rachael.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I might actually follow up later on other ways that they've provided feedback. It sounds like you had students, well, maybe right now, but you've had students provide their analysis back to the company, as well as the kind of providing them with the marketing brief at the front end. So that sounds kind of interesting. What are some of the roadblocks? I'm getting a sense that time is one of them, and I've heard from anecdotally from other folks that have written cases that sometimes the review process is more extensive than they were maybe anticipating. But what are some of the key roadblocks or challenges you faced along the way? Because sharing that might help other people avoid them, right? Was there anything that was surprising or more difficult than you anticipated, or anything that popped up that made the process difficult?
I'll jump in. Three things. Number one is that we've already touched on, but getting that review process done, that does take a bit. So the one person, he was one of five owners in a company, and he was on board and had talked to the other partners about it, but it took about a month for him to kind of just review it with them. So again, being clear and getting that done up front. Number two, you think you have the teaching notes locked down and they come back with, well, have you thought about, and you start adding stuff. So it extends your deadline a bit. Number three, the references. I'm very big on keeping good data on where I got everything out of, a CBC report or CTV or whatever, but man, you think you have everything down and those references come back and it is like, keep good notes on it, and their method is a little bit different on how they want that done. So that's the one other thing that takes a little bit of time and headaches on that. Yeah.
In data collection step, going and coming back, actually many times when you are gathering the data is the most actually challenging step, I think, because based on the actually methodology that you have chosen and you want to go actually through the steps. So sometimes you go through it and you have to come back because you are not sure that if it is the correct way you all want to get through it or not. Just this going and coming back is the most challenging.
I think it probably goes without saying, but make sure your protagonist is open to being candid and really sharing their experience. I think that makes for a better case. And sometimes that's not easy for them for whatever reason. So that kind of, Denise talked about having that upfront conversation about consent, but it's also about how much are you willing to share. And then with respect to the timeline, what I did with a few of my cases was tested them in the classroom, which adds to your timeline. And it's good in a way and it's not good in another way because it can kind of take you in different directions based on the feedback from the class. So I think that's maybe a style choice. I would still do it again, but just be aware it can definitely take you off the 6-week timeline if that's your goal, getting that feedback. And then this is kind of a weird one, I'm going to mention it. I often teach the cases that I publish. I think I know the case very well, and I think there's a lot of benefit to the students. But I have had student comments saying, Connie makes us read things that she gets money for. So I think framing that up front, and I know Allan may make a lot of money on his cases, but it's not for the money that we do this. But I think just being transparent with the students and saying, like, I want to teach this case because I know it well, and I think we can really dig deep, and that's beneficial to you, is something I would do in the future.
Yeah, the students here are funny about stuff like that. A couple things in that area. Thank you, Rachel. The sort of permissions. Again, mine was a little bit different, unique. There was a lot of back and forth, and with Indigenous principals and even the attorneys, because there was a couple of others who were involved in the presentations to the tribunal. Steve Carey and Ronnie himself and a couple of their sort of clerks, and they're all Indigenous people, and they're busy professionals, and it's an extended process. I also had support and some quotes in the case and a long conversation with Roy Bearchief and Dion Simon here, and Dion especially is like, you quote him and then you have to show him the quote, and Dion's like, let me think about that. A few months go by, he's like, Dion, we look at that thing, yeah, come over, man. And he looks at what you did, he's like, I'm not really sure I want to be positioned that way, so could we just change that a bit? So then there's a conversation, and it's fun. It's part of the fun of, I consider part of the fun of reconciliation. It's a dialogue and a conversation, but it's a big question mark. It extends the timelines. Test driving the case in class, absolutely huge. And that does add to the time. I was going to think about it. If you do it in the winter semester, say kind of early March, you test drive your case, you're excited, you see how the students responded. Oh, they really got that. They didn't get that at all. I'll work that into the next iteration of the case. Well, the next time you're going to give it is October or November, the next semester, right? So I highly recommend test driving it with real people, or getting a friendly colleague to try it in their section of the class. But it does add time, but that's vitally important.
Kind of a pilot running of it, which is kind of great to get that feedback. Is it clear? Is it understood? And how much revision did you end up making between after piloting? Was it pretty good, or did you wholesale change it, or?
For me, I mean, not like a redraft, but an interesting nuance, and it was actually really good because it was a sustainability case on fashion, and the students have like really important opinions about fashion and fast fashion, and we're very critical of Paul Hardy's approaches. So it more changed the teaching note to prepare for whoever's teaching it, to say this could be a really interesting conversation around some of the tensions, which is kind of my theoretical lens in sustainability, but certainly not like a full editing or anything like that.
Yeah. Excellent. And I'm glad that you're on the panel, Allan, because I think it's important that we think through the additional time frame and the consultation that is required when working with First Nations. And so I think that's important for folks that might be viewing it, is just building in that time and the communication and the opportunity for feedback. So thanks. Any other challenges? No?
Just a tip I'd throw in, look at the Ivy website, look at some cases, because they rank very popular cases in your area. So look at a really popular finance case, look at the teaching note in the case as an example of what works and what becomes popular. That's a really great way to learn. That's a key part. On the issue of revisions, the first submission I made came back with substantial requirements just around the positioning of the time element of the case. Their kind of acquisitions editor, I'm not sure what her title is, but was, we love it, we're going to go ahead with it, but we need you to essentially inject an element of fantasy in the timing, that certain things of when I was meeting with Ron and when he was talking with me, and what kind of the narrative within the case, it needed to be more, it needed to appear like it was happening now, rather than the actual tribunal decision was 2017. And of course you can't change history, but she wanted the discussions and the language to be more like, right now Ron is looking at this. Yes, it's a case he worked on 2017, but what's his current thinking, and Ron leans back at his desk, all that stuff. You make a case feel accessible for people from a kind of literary point of view. All that needed to be brought right up to the present. That was the only kind of, but now it's at academic review, so I'm sure they have the professors at Queen's, because I think that's who looks at the Ivy cases, not Queen's Ivy. I always mix up Ivy and Waterloo. To me, it's all just one big thing.
No, it's not. As a graduate.
I think it goes to Ivy professors, right? Part of their workload
Peer
is
review, yeah.
peer review, and so I'm waiting for that part. That's
But
coming
all
soon.
of that adds to the whole protagonist piece, right? Is, and to Connie's comment, that person, you want to put them in a good light because it's their business, it's their baby. But you're trying to make a case to help students, and so there's a bit of a disconnect there on what that success looks like, because we would write stuff and then the owner would look at it and he'd go,
Yeah.
okay, but that's not really the top company in our industry, and you're like, it's a case, like it's,
Yeah.
but to them it has to be so accurate. And then back to one other piece, I want to compliment Don that's in the room with us today too, is not only the notes on Ivy, but we sat with Don and he was super helpful to us of what his experience was. So I'm sure all of us, I'll speak for myself, but anybody watching this, feel free to come and knock on our door and ask, like, anything more, any questions that you might have from this, because it really helps speed up our process to get to that finish line faster by just what Don's experience was. So hopefully this helps too.
Yeah, showing it to the protagonist, showing it to the company, having them look at it is important. In my case, again, it was a lawyer, and he wanted it all. He would make changes and edit it in certain ways as a lawyer, and
Yeah.
and I had to go to him and say, it's not a law school case. It's we'd have these breakfasts, and he and it was like, no, it's not a law school case, and the language you're putting in there, this legalistic stuff, it's not going to fly. And so there was always these conversations. Okay, do another version and send it to me, Allan.
Yeah,
And
helping
just
them
look at it,
understand.
helping them understand. Really, this is a teaching mechanism.
Rose, anything else to add?
Yeah, that was very good actually idea, and I want to add that conveying is the best way. You need to write it in a way that is readable and is structured. Sometimes in this way you convey what you have. If you just went through the clarified it, collected it, and now it's the time to convey it. By conveying, it means that it should be very readable and it should be very structured. As we said, sometimes using some special words it's not. There's a rule in actually publishing. They said that it is grandma's rule. I don't know have you heard or no.
No,
They said that you need to write in a way that if your grandma reads it, understand what does it mean. Not in a way that is full of technical words that no one understands what does it mean. Yeah, it is the grandma's rule.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Our last question, and then I do want to open it up to the audience because we have lots of people in the room that have written cases that may want to add some comments or friendly disagreements to what's been said. But we're really curious about the future. So we've kind of looked back and you've shared lots of tips about your experiences. And we're curious about whether you have more plans to write more cases in the future or what's next. Connie, do you want to start?
Yeah, so in my role right now, there's not a lot of research time, so I would like to try to carve out for case writing because of what we've described. One of my mentors is the returning CEO of Petronas, which is an oil and gas company here in Calgary. And so I'd really like to write a case about him because he's, of all the CEOs I've kind of engaged with in the oil and gas industry, he's very open to the negative side of his industry and what that means. And so I think if he can be really open in a case, it would make for a really good case. And then there's a project underway, just kicked off in the Institute for Community Prosperity around refugee reintegration into workforce here in Calgary. And I think it would make for also a really interesting case. And also I think my vision is to move some of what's happening in the institutes into cases. Simon, Rady, listening? Because there's just so much good work happening, and there's so much connection with community that I think would make for really great cases.
Me? Yes, I've become friends with Matthias Kipping. Dr. Kipping is the Richard Waugh Professor of Business History at Rotman in Toronto. And he's a business historian who teaches business history at Rotman. And he's let me know that there's a huge appetite now for historical cases that look like a historic event, and use that as an example, especially for strategy and management. It's not my area, so I would have to tweak it a bit to work in finance, but so people know, my PhD is in history actually. So I was interested to talk to Matthias and see how that this really works, and students love it. Some kind of historical event in the past doesn't have to be 300 years ago. It could be a big thing in the 60s or 70s that was a major merger, or a huge kind of new security was introduced. I'm thinking about options started trading in New York in 1972, and there was all kinds of guff and concern about what that would do to the markets. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking at doing going forward. Definitely want to write more cases. I'd love to find the time, because it is really fun and it's rewarding when it all comes together. Like, I've test-driven my case a couple of times, and when it works in class and the students get the point, they do the financial calculations, then you hear them talking about the Rome Statute and the United Nations protocol on indigenous peoples, and there's always those students who get their backs up about indigenization as, hey, the world is tough kind of thing. And then there's those other ones who are perhaps more progressive, and they embrace the conversation. And it's interesting to see how that all sort of plays out in class. So definitely want to do more cases.
Cool. Yes, and like I had mentioned earlier, trying to resurrect and finish the second case at that one company, and then have some other ideas, like from the recent qualitative research, is to dig a little deeper with some of those companies and see if they're willing to write a case on that. That's a method of how we add big data to companies, big data without strategically aligning people, process, technology. So to look at that transition that they went through. And then there's one particular company, or two companies, targeting to try to see if we can get in and write a case. One has already said yes, finding the time. The second one is door knocking and seeing if they're open to it. So lots of good ideas. It goes back to time again, so to find the time to do this.
So there's an organization here in Calgary, and so they have a problem because they have had some changes in their strategy, and they are seeing their resistance among the people, especially the board members. And so we have had some meetings with them, and we are going to start a case there for this change management problem to be able to help them. Cool.
I'm glad Allan said what he did, because I feel like we've said a lot of things that might discourage people, but they are fun, they are important, they're great. And yeah, so
That's cool.
do it, just do it.
You
do it,
alluded to it, but just so people know, there is obviously it's not the motivation to do it. I love the kind of giving back to the community, but can you describe the royalties, or whatever you would call it, that you might receive if you write a case?
I just had a book published on Amazon, and my partner said, "How much money are we going to make?" And I said, "Maybe $50 over the next year on Amazon." So we have two cases, and we got our first check for $57 or $67. So not much. You're not going to get rich off of this at all. Maybe certain cases, those bestseller ones, I'm sure they do better, but it's more of, I enjoy it. I enjoy giving back to the community. It's fun with the students and all that, but buy you a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
$50
similar. I think the
bottle.
most was like
Great.
Expensive tasting wine.
just over like $100.
Yeah.
And then, just so you're aware, like, then you do have to claim it, and there is a T4 slip because it always comes late. So just
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Dawn, you're here. You have co-authored a case with Brad Queering.
That's right.
Is there anything you want to add to the conversation? Anything you think that this fantastic group of panelists may have missed?
Well, my strategy was to co-author with someone who could write, hence Brad. I found the process quite challenging in terms of always coming back to the protagonist. Fortunately, our case was of an alumni who was very, very generous with his time. And it was always, could we meet one more time? Could we meet one more time? So I'm wondering from the panel, what advice you have on prepping for that interview and the process you went through in terms of research and writing. Because I suspect when Ivy says 6 weeks, they mean just writing. They don't mean all the other stuff that
I
gets
think
done.
that's right, yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
But I'm wondering if you have any advice on how I can make that less painful. Because it took months and months and months of getting Cooper to come back for yet another coffee at Mount Royal. So Cooper Leary and his wife were students of mine. Back in the day, we had an entrepreneurship program where you did a directed field studies, and they had to run a business for the summer. And him and his then girlfriend started up Cochrane Landscape Services. And it's now a business, you may know them. They do well over $10 million
wow.
a year in landscaping, both hard landscaping, meaning building things. And really successful company. They've employed many of my students, well over 100 employees now. But I had a guy who was more than willing to go for many coffees and beers I even went to his house one night to interview him. So what did you do? And by the way, thanks Connie, I started off that journey by reading your case. I had forgotten that until you mentioned it. Yeah, so I just took that knowledge and gave it to Denise.
Well, thanks.
I would say my approach is more, because I do qualitative research generally, and so
Yeah.
my approach is more structured. So list of questions, either Zoom tape or record tape, transcribe, and then sort of pull out what I need, and then really just going back for clarifications or expanding pieces. So like kind of colder, not going for beers, which sounds really fun, but like very, very focused and
Right.
directed.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the difference. I'm not trained as a researcher, so
Right.
I'm probably pretty messy about the whole thing.
Oh, for my part of that, just showing, everyone's so busy, right? All these people are so busy that it's just showing them, communicating to them, like a lot of preparation, like going in for some kind of blue sky whiteboard meeting. Hey, just wondering what your challenges have been recently. It's not going to work. It's like, I've looked at your business, I've read through the media, I've looked through all the material, I've looked at the case transcripts, I've read a couple thousand pages of the tribunal reports, I've looked at relevant other decisions, and I have some focused questions for you. That works.
Okay.
But any kind of generalistic thing. So preparing well that you kind of respect them and you respect their time and they feel elite. Like Ron is really excited. Like, when's the case coming out, man? Yeah, that's just being prepared and really sort of like what Connie's being a bit cold about it. You know, here's a list of things I've got to do. Let's spend, can I get you on the phone for 20 minutes and boom, 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 you go through the list.
That's an excellent question, Don, because I think it's important for people just starting out. I think the process that we use, so again, both of us qualitative researchers, both very strong at interviewing, more from like career, like for employment. But I would echo the same is number one, when you sort of have an idea and you've talked to this person briefly, that you kind of know a bit of the direction. Then go do your research, a lot of research, and be very clear on what you're trying to do. But the first meeting was almost, I hate to say that kind of pie in the sky, but sort of, who are you, what's your business, what your industry, but that also writes the first part of the case, right? Of kind of that industry overview. And gathering that information, so a 1 hour interview, we went back and digested it and said, I think we've got 6 cases here, why don't we focus on these 2? We go back and we pitch it, and they say yes, and then the interviews from there are very, very directed to finish the information that you need to finalize that. So it was 2-3 interviews in total.
Okay.
First one overview, summary, second one very directed to just make sure we can finalize the case.
Yeah, I totally agree. Semi-structured or structured interviews actually are very important. To know what you are looking for and to prepare everything. And sometimes I send them the questions before, and so let them think about it,
yes.
because it is very time, it saves your time and their time also. because they're also busy people. It is not in the way. But if you want to just talk about everything, finally you cannot get anything. So at the end, sometimes for categorizing and getting something, some of these softwares are helpful. Nowadays we can use some softwares. I just put the interviews in and categorize very quickly. I just drag out some of the main points that I want from it, and so put in one category. And for the next interview, when I come out, exactly the same day, because my mind is fresh, I sit down and think about it and just use some of these softwares and just categorize it. And for the next interview, I know which part is the gap and in which part I should focus more.
Yeah.
And so the next question changed. The next interview, maybe the question actually changed.
Thanks, that's great advice, thank you.
So I have a question that Mauricio asked. He couldn't be here and wanted to be, and he's looking forward to watching the recording. He's very curious about the future of case writing and AI. And we talked a little bit about how some professors are using AI to generate, vignettes and short cases for their exams or for in-class activities, and was just wanting to throw that question out there around how is AI impacting case writing. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I do. I, in fact, prepared for that very question. And I was telling my students this week, if you think of a very basic pedagogical tool, so Bloom's taxonomy, we should know about that here in Royal, which is kind of the increasingly more complex and I want to say abstract forms of knowledge kind of transfer between a student and a teacher. The basic level is just getting them to remember facts and then understand those facts, and then apply and then analyze. And then the top two levels of Bloom's taxonomy are evaluate and create new information. The first four levels will be done by AI. I tell my 50-10 students, forget about all this calculations and formulas you've learned in finance. That's all going to be done by machines, okay? But as a human, your value added to your corporation will be to evaluate things and to create new knowledge and to negotiate with other human beings. So I think that in cases, there's going to be my just gamble is that the future of cases will be this higher level thinking, the decision-making part, rather than the technicalities of a calculation or some accounting process. It's going to be more around what is the problem here and how can we create new knowledge? How would an organization choose to negotiate this issue? But like that, I think that the change coming from AI is that the low-hanging fruit and the easy parts in organizations that are easily automated will be automated. And then it's up to us to use what will be needed for, what our graduates will be needed for, their brains and their ability to do that higher order thinking. And that comes, ironically as hell, that comes from a lifetime of reading, of thinking, of talking, of observing art, of observing the creative arts, being able to be human in a sense. I think really that's the future. It's about pulling the students along and making them, preparing them to think at a higher level and to pull out relationships and connections that the mechanical stuff just doesn't matter. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you, Allan. And I think in my world of strategy and sustainability, like what interests me and what I think is great to convey in a case is the complexity, right? So it's not just a one-dimensional. There's other elements and they're in contradiction of each other, and there's paradoxes everywhere and so on. So I think that elevates to that higher level. The other thing, and this is my evolution as a case writer, is to bring in the humanity, right? To tell a story about the individual and what they're grappling with, a little bit about their history, what motivates them. I think all of that, I don't think is out in the technosphere to pull in an AI way. I think that's really getting at, and we're all human, whether we're in business and finance, accounting, like we're all people making decisions. And so sort of keying into that human element, I think results in a case that AI wouldn't write, in my opinion.
The book that I just wrote is actually on how to make good decisions, and where some of that comes from is, so it's a skill that's highly valued by industry, is the ability to make a good decision, but we never teach it. What does it mean to make a good decision? And certain things for the students to go through, like I think the students want, and this is an overgeneralization, but just tell me what the answer is, or show me another paper that got an A so that I can get my A. That's not valued by industry, and I get that. We're all busy, and we do it in industry too, right? What are we rewarded on? Well, I'll just go towards that goal. But to really stop and force them to think things through, and what's important, what's not important, the application of everything they've learned in their degree, what data to pull from, how to analyze it, that's what makes a good decision maker. And if we can send them into the world with, you know, less rubrics in the fourth year and more of that grayness, and to take that stand and something, I think that's valuable for the student.
Yeah. I believe technology, and especially AI, is very good and helpful in the life. If you look at the past, when we had new technologies, there were some people who were pros and cons and ideas and says it is good, it is not good. But the point is that how to use it. We cannot trust whatever it is generating for us. And the best thing is to reading the best books, the best cases and paper about it. And I believe lived experience is completely different with what the AI is generating. Yeah. We are human beings, we are living in the society, and the experience, the cases that we are talking is about lived experience, which is completely different, and it needs to figure it out, think about that, and just analyze different dimensions, because maybe you are just asking the AI and you get the answer, but it is not the complete answer because it cannot analyze it in different dimensions. We need to think about in this way, and the student need to learn to think thoroughly and from different angles to a problem to be able to solve it.
So I'm not teaching right now. I'd be interested to hear from those of you who are. Like, is there though a role for AI, like in a short vignette to make part of a midterm exam where you short answer questions or something? Like, maybe that is a positive potential for AI.
It makes it easier for us, doesn't it? Like to not have to create the vignette.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also worry about some of the copyright too, right? Like, am I breaking some of that by taking somebody else's ideas?
Right, but I mean, again, and I'm not in this space right now, but I'm sure you can acknowledge that it is AI, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing there's some questions. I know Reza had his hand up. Juliet has a question too.
Okay, so my question is, I'm just very insightful comments and helpful in all aspects, but I'm trying to understand that while I understand the writing case and publishing, it's obviously time consuming. It's a lot of hell of work and, you know, back and forth and editing, you know, putting comments just like we do for, you know, PRG articles and stuff like that. But I was just browsing the ID publishing while I'm hearing all these things. So some of these things interesting, like there are tons of cases available out there too. I just typed simply Canada and I found almost 3,274 cases in Canada. Whereas when I typed my home country, Bangladesh, I found only 55 cases. When I typed Ireland, I also found 78 cases. So I'm just trying to find out, one is obviously selling point, one of also to make it really more effective in the academic world, that when we are talking about globalization, we are talking about all these new ideas. There are, like, if I type, say, time value of money, I find 1,000. If I type merger acquisitions, like these are the topics we usually teach in the classroom. So I'm just thinking, like, what is your perspective to make those cases really, really unique? Something different, not just the traditional, you know, topics of cases just for the sake of publishing or just for the sake of teaching. Are there any topics like, you know, the Allan, you know, you're working on indigenization, and I think that's something unique. I didn't find too many. So any thoughts on that particular ground, that how we can make this world of case publication more productive, more effective, in the coming years?
I would say I wouldn't want them that specialized. Like I teach each semester and I try not to use the same cases for about 3 years so that the students have kind of weeded through, right? And they haven't passed the case on to somebody else, and keep that fresh. That trying to find something similar as a general supply chain case, 3 or 4 come out per year. That's not enough to sustain me.
Right.
So I'm using cases that are 6 years old. So I don't necessarily want them super unique. I do want sort of something that just focuses on like a general approach that includes a bit of warehouse, includes a bit of distribution, includes a bit of strategy, includes a bit of operations, so that I can teach like something more well-rounded than diving too deep. That's me personally in the classroom. And there's not enough, even though there's 5,000-10,000 cases, it's still not enough per year for what I'm looking for, believe it or not.
I think you raise a good point though, Reza. In my mind, like some of the uniqueness may come from, and this is where maybe tying the case to your broader research program, right? Like you're digging into something that's a gap that we don't know enough about, and then that spurs the case, right? So that it is not necessarily unique, but it's tied to a research question that's compelling. I think that might be one way. The other is, maybe there is, and that's an interesting way you approach that, but there is an opportunity for more global cases. I'm sure that would be part of, and that would be welcome probably by the publisher, but more importantly, we as Mount Royal would like to see that as well, right, in terms of our internationalization goals. I think that's a good insight.
I would like to see more on indigenization because it's a requirement for us, but I know from me being in corporate world for 25 years, I kind of knew what I knew, but boy, if I could have some more help on certain topics for me now to equip the students, like, having a band council resolution, right? That was, we couldn't do business with the Indigenous population without it. Boy, it would be helpful to understand, how do I negotiate that as a supply chain student? How do I forge that relationship and get something like that done? Like that type of expertise would be huge for me to have if that was in the domain.
Well, there's some interesting equity sharing things happening, right?
Right.
Those would make for great cases.
Great cases, yeah.
While keeping in mind the complexity of it, that every First Nation will have its own story and its own protocols, its own interests, and its own
Contracts
politics
and
happening
everything.
internally, and that there's no one size fits all, but there's a sort of a complexity to it. That's a key point. Just to raise two things. First of all, again, I was told I had an anxiety at the beginning that time value of money is such a basic topic in finance. It's the first thing everybody learns. That is there space for another case with time value of money in it? And they said, she told me that they consider the shelf life of a case to be 4 or 5 years. They will always want new cases because time's going by, and you might do a case this year, and after 5 or 6 years, the adoption of that case drops off. So they're always looking for new iterations, new discussions of the old classic topics, okay? But in a new light or with a new angle, like the indigenization and time value of money. That was intriguing to Ivy. So I think that there's always there's always going to be a market for the classic topics. They're just reinvented or rediscussed in a new way with a new context, a new story. Secondly, any kind of new product, new security. I'm just giving a case this semester on SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisitions Corporations. It's a type of security with an option built into it, and it's a brand new case. So that kind of thing, like looking for the newest thing, the newest sort of process in the markets, or the newest security for us, or the newest
blockchain or whatever.
Right, blockchain or AI. How does that work? That's also one approach. The international question is one that's very important to me, and I think that you're right. If I'm hearing you correctly, there needs to be more, and I think that Ivy, for one, is very open to that. I've been amazed at how open they were to indigenization. So I think that a case that comes and looks at a non-traditional or non-central company or organization from the global south, I think would receive lots of interest. And then, remember, they're working with you. They're in the business of, I had a book editor tell me this lately, he said, Allan, it never bothers me to send me stuff because that's my oxygen, getting book proposals from people. So they will work with you. So if you send, I have this, there's a corporation or there was a crisis in Bangladesh with a business, there was a whole crisis that happened, and I've written a case about it. They'll come back to you and say, hey, we like it, but you need to emphasize more the strategic part, or you need to minimize the whatever, the politics of it. They will work with you. So that's also should give people some confidence that they should go ahead with the process.
I'll just add to that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can Juliet ask her question soon?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I'm going to take us back to like an entry-level kind of question. So the question says, what sort of data collection goes into the process, and does the publisher want to see a rigorous research method section, just like a peer-reviewed article, right? So I hear that it could be primary or secondary, but does the reviewer want to see like a rigorous data collection process? The second one says, what is the differentiating art of writing a case study when compared to a peer-reviewed article? So do you have like an introduction where you identify the research gap, objective, a body where you talk about the theoretical framework? Like, is there like a kind of structure to that?
There's a very, well, for Ivy, there's a very defined structure, but it's nothing like a journal article. So it's very much about, the first paragraph has to sort of set the scene for the individual that you're focused on, and then an industry overview, etc. So it's quite formulaic. So that will help guide you for sure. In terms of the methodology, I've never been asked about the research method. There are questions about, I would like to see more data here, or can you dig in more here? And then as Denise pointed out, Ivy at least is really picky on like the date you extracted something from the internet. Everything is very much about the time and the timeline. So yeah, does that answer your questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just added on data. Again, it's not a peer-reviewed article. They're not looking for.
Well, it is peer reviewed.
It is peer-reviewed, yes, but it's not a journal article in that sense. So
Yeah.
I found that the standards or the expectations were somewhat lower, and that I had exhibits and I had data that I pulled out. For example, all of the interest rates of Canadian government bonds since 1888. I mean, you can get this stuff, right? The Bank of Canada has. So as long as it's sourced properly,
Yeah.
and the date is there, when I pulled this out of the Bank of Canada data set, then
They'll be concerned about copyright, and
Yeah.
that would be
Huge,
something
yeah,
you have to
to
consider.
protect them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the general case format, just to add a bit to Connie, is there's always an opening paragraph. Denise sat there looking out her window. She had to make a decision for the board. She had 2 weeks to make it, and that's the opening. There's a section that'll talk about the industry. So for us on the liquor, right, it's who's drinking it, how often, where are they drinking it. So that's a couple of pages. And then there's a couple of pages on the company. How long have they been around? Who's the ownership? What's their strategy? What do they mainly put out? What are they good at? What do they do? And then the case closes and it said, well, Denise is ready to go to the meeting. She thought she was prepared to answer this question. That's it. Like, that's basically the format for an Ivy case. And then some nice exhibits. So when we said 5 to 8 pages, that's the written portion. And then it's nice to have 2 to 4 pages. Financials, if you can get them, pictures of the people or pictures of their site or their brand, different things like that. Yeah.
And Leah, I don't know, have you had Ivy come to give a workshop or any case
We
writing
haven't.
workshops?
I know faculty members have been funded through FTC to attend the IB workshop, which is now offered virtually as well. I've heard very mixed reviews on that, to be quite honest with you. I know some have said it really feels like a sales pitch, and also that there are other venues other than IB
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
to publish cases. So I don't know. And I know they used to run it in person, and people would actually
Yeah.
find the networking component of those relationships to be quite valuable. But I welcome your thoughts on professional development. And I do think spending a lot of time reading cases and teaching with cases
Yeah.
is sort of step one, right? You can glean a lot by actually doing that pre-work.
And I know if Kendra were here, she's brought cases to ASAC like quite a
Yes.
few times. So that's a great, they have
That's
a
a good thought.
development
Right.
Yeah,
theme. So you could just, a case you're just working on, you can bring it there and they'll give you feedback.
yeah.
And ASAC is a great place to network as well. I know you're new here, so you may not be familiar, but yeah.
And Julian, I say it that flippant because as an MBA person that we were doing like 10 per week over 2 years, it was just case after case after case, and you get to know the routine of what it looks like, yeah, separate from writing it. Yeah.
Do you need to have ethics approval or just a research activity form or neither?
Yeah, so I think Leah added that to the document for today, but I reached out to Priscilla and know if it's for the classroom, if it's a teaching case and not, like we use the term case study and qualitative research as well, so that could be a different thing, but no, if it's for the classroom, the publisher will have their own. So, yeah.
Thought that would be a question that pops up. You had a
Oh, I was just
comment.
going to comment on Ray's question about location. I think it's important. And I think being in Western Canada can be a real advantage, having gone through Ivy. It was 2 years of cases basically in Ontario. And I think as instructors, we're looking for things across. So if you're thinking about adoption, I suspect that the success we've had with our case is partly, A, it was in the service industry, it was very different than manufacturing. And B, it was Calgary based.
Yeah.
You know, I've never been able to find out who's buying the case,
No.
where it's being taught. I
Yeah.
asked, but I didn't get a reply.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
No kidding, eh? The
Yeah.
profiles.
Too bad.
Because the case has had some success, but you're right, it really has dropped off over 3 years. But initially, I was really pleased with it.
Well, Harvard used it for a couple of years probably, and then they,
Well, yes, they did, and I've turned down many requests to go teach it there.
I want to throw in one final little
Yes.
hitch.
Plus,
sorry?
sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
No, my colleague Kathy Roy Heaton and I have been doing an exercise in the finance capstone course, which is, finance is now the biggest program here. So we have 3 sections of finance 50-10 every semester. We have the students make a case and a teaching note and deliver it to their colleagues. So the last 3 classes of the semester are 2 per session. The students in groups have written a case, and it's rigorous. The requirements are rigorous, and a teaching note, and they deliver. And the cases are fantastic.
That's clever.
Fantastic.
On the-
There was one last semester. I wanted to
I
get
like that.
the students to reshape it. I'll work with them and submit it to the Kennedy School of Government or any public administration school. It dealt with the government of Greece and the decision they had to make, the finance minister, on a certain type of security that they had been sold by Goldman Sachs, and it bankrupted the country, and it was so good. So it's a great way for students, and there's a lot of research on this. Kendra knows a lot about it. A lot of research, social research, that says that when students have to create and deliver their own case to their peers, they learn a lot.
Yeah,
So keep that in mind.
Plus also, I think the case study, I feel, like, Allan, you and I were talking about, 2 days back about history and all these things. I wish like I can bring a case study in the classroom, say Hudson Bay 18th century and Hudson Bay today. So it's even like I teach finance, but their business strategy has different impact on finance back then and back now. And the same thing, time value of money or whatever it is, if I could show that how this has been evolved over time, again, we can give an impression to students that, the next era of AI will bring more changes down the road if that changes happen over a century. So I believe those kind of cases, I wish there are, but that might be helpful.
You're right though about like time value of money. It's the same fundamental, but it's disguised
It's different.
differently, right? So yeah.
Risk, the concept of financial risk,
Risk
is there
is a
through our
huge
history.
one. Yeah. Thanks, gang. That was so interesting. I learned a ton. I love that
Thank you,
idea.
Connie, Allan,
Thank you.
Denise, and Rose. We appreciate your contributions and your donating your time so that others can learn from your experience. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank
I learned
you.
a ton.
Thank you so much.
Okay.